Now, you've described Zionism's exploitation of the memory of the Holocaust as an ideological weapon, which enables the Zionist state of Israel, one of the world's most formidable military powers, and to use your words, with a horrendous human rights record. You say this use of this weapon enables Israel to cast itself as a victim state in order to garner immunity to criticism. Will you put some flesh on the bone of that statement and tell us from your perspective how the playing of the Holocaust card has worked to date to make Israel immune from criticism in the Judeo-Christian world?
Well, the basic innovation of what I call, not that it's a brilliant coinage, but just if I can refer to it, the Holocaust industry, its main innovation was, beginning in the 1970s, this whole cottage industry developed trying to prove what was called Holocaust uniqueness, or what, if you read the scholarly literature, is called the uniqueness doctrine. And this, there was this vast proliferation of, in my opinion, pseudo-scholarship, which could probably fill this entire room, trying to demonstrate that the Nazi Holocaust was unique in the sense that no people in the history of humanity had ever suffered the way Jews suffered. Now, intellectually, that doctrine is vacuous. Morally, it's an abomination, this notion of ranking human suffering. How can you prove that somebody who's been napalmed, a child who's been napalmed, has suffered less than a child who's been dispatched to a gas chamber?
Or we could talk about red Indians in America.
Right. You know, how do you prove things? And why would you even want to go there, you know?
Well, why do they go there is the point.
That's the point. Because intellectually it's barren, morally it's an abomination, but politically it's very useful. Because if you can prove that people have suffered uniquely, then the natural corollary is they should get special moral entitlements. They shouldn't be held to the same standard as the same moral or legal standard as everyone else. And the fact is, whenever you try to hold Israel to any ordinary standard of legality or morality, we're told, remember the Holocaust.
So there are the very roots of the double standard.
Yeah, I think that were it not for this Holocaust doctrine of uniqueness, Israel could not legitimize most of what it does.
My question is this: murderous repression of the Palestinian people. What really, Norman, explains this behavior?
Oh, I think what explains it is perfectly obvious. It's the only way you can achieve the goal that they set for themselves. You want to create a overwhelmingly Jewish state in an area which is overwhelmingly not Jewish. And there's no way you can achieve that goal except by, since in the 20th century extermination is not an option, the American style, then the only option is to expel them. And it's very difficult, just like it's very difficult to uproot a tree that's been in the ground for 100 years. You have to dig very deep to get those roots out, to extirpate it. It's very difficult to uproot an entire indigenous population. And you know, if you read the historians, once they defined their goal as wanting to create a Jewish state, and by a Jewish state they meant a state in which a maximum non-Jewish minority would be about 15%. That's what they had in mind. Well, how else do you do it? I mean, I don't think there were many options. They're now trying a slightly different strategy in the occupied territories, which is the apartheid strategy. Namely, keep as much as you can of the land, put the indigenous population in these Bantustans, and try to do it that way.
But Norman, it's worse than that. I'm sorry to interrupt. I think it's worse than that. I think the whole drive is to make life hell, to create conditions, in the hope that the Palestinians will simply pack up and leave.
I totally agree with that, and that's exactly what I was going to say.
But the question then becomes, what if they don't pack up and leave?
I totally agree.
You see, I can see a nightmare scenario in which there is a Zionist Holocaust. They create the conditions to drive them off.